In June, when the new emergency regulations came out, tucked away at the end of the media regulations, one could find a regulation which claimed to be aimed at news agencies, requiring them to register. A closer reading of this regulation provided one with the usual understanding of government newspeak, namely that the clause aimed at news agencies was not aimed at news agencies, it was aimed at everyone else. It required any journalist who wrote or was employed by more than one publication, and as it so happens, most fits into that category, to enter their names on a list housed with the Minister of Home Affairs. If they, in the opinion of the Minister, contravened any mysterious regulation, they could be struck from this register and prevented from practicing as journalists. Now, at first, the mainstream press ignored this issue, convinced it was aimed only at alternative news agencies and therefore did not matter. I recall that the Save the Press Committee in Johannesburg arranged an emergency meeting with the South African editors who happened conveniently to be meeting on an issue of their own in Johannesburg that day. Most chose to send their apologies. It appeared that almost all the South African editors were at that very moment urgently required to fly abroad. Thus, only 2 or 3 editors attended, one of whom remarked that he considered the new regulations eminently reasonable. Then suddenly came an abrupt change. The publishers of the major newspapers asked their lawyers for an opinion on the regulations, were told to their surprise that the registration threat hung over everyone. Even the largest companies would have to apply for licenses, and they realized a licensed press would be credible with very few people. Suddenly, in July, for the first time, both the mainstream and the alternative press united on one issue. Joint public meetings were held. Representations were sent to the minister. And for the first time in a rather long history of the media, a press-related issue succeeded. The registration clause was quietly dropped. Now, slightly unfair here, because I'm suggesting that the single motive was self-preservation. In fact, what really happened was that there was a minority of liberal editors who had long supported us and who had had hearings from no one, and who now, for the first time, were being listened to by their colleagues. The significance of all of this can be seen in the reaction to the suspension of the Weekly Mail. Suddenly, there is enormous media interest in the alternative press. The media coverage of the suspension of the Weekly Mail can only be described as extraordinarily generous. The Star, for example, handed over a page every week to us. The Sunday Tribune had one issue which was only about the Weekly Mail from cover to cover, bar 1 or 2 girly pictures. Radio 702 provided half-hour updates on the latest developments between the Weekly Mail and Stoffelbotha. Even Beeld revealed that it was a little uncomfortable about all this. And the impact went much further. Readers, for example, including a large group from this university, banded together to raise money for a Save the Weekly Mail advertisement. Diplomats issued protests. And even more remarkable, advertisers, who are usually the most conservative elements in society and the first group to flee over the hills at the very moment of controversy, instead flocked on board.